Yeah, go tell him though. He's always he's not here now. I said, no, we came together. We said, "Well, you're gonna get out of the car, I'm gonna get out of the car." He said, "My dog knows it's yours." He knows who we married.
No, I don't know why I'm getting so old these days. How do you add a person? B-O-R-Y. B like boy, D like in David. Look who's here, guys.
Oh my gosh, Rabbi, I didn't even see it. How you doing? Yeah, my mom is.
Like, I see, she said about Marine, I said, I called her up the other day, I said, yeah, I heard you Jews moved down. I said, what are you doing? I said, Marine. Well, she's not such a follower. I said, listen, nobody is.
At least her kid.
No, we're not even here for followers. We just like to connect with Jewish people.
It's beautiful.
It's
Very sorry for
amazing.
your loss.
It's a big deal. I'm glad that everybody came. Thank you for coming. How long ago did you move into this building? It's building 2007.
Hi, Camille.
I know. Very frank and young. Whoa. That's what I did last time. He said, 500 is great. Friends and family, yes. What? Why do you do this? I don't know. Yes, I do. Busy. She had it.
I know, it's so nice.
Finally, you're getting around? Sorry, I don't want to ask you too many details how you're doing, but you're okay, right?
I can drive again.
Thank you very much.
I said, well, look, you don't have to live that way. You don't have to.
That's great.
Why is it coming?
You like the rabbi? That's true. He didn't, even though he was nudnik, but I'm feeling this, but he liked it. He liked it. Smile. Moshe, thank you for coming.
Let it go bad in the heat. The microphones are connected to this or no?
Yeah.
So do you need us to hold them or it's okay on the table?
No, go ahead and take care of it. Everything's connected.
I'm saying, do we need to hold the microphones or can we leave them on the table?
No,
Or
you have to
sitting?
hold them.
We're gonna have to hold
Yeah,
them.
when you're speaking, you have to hold them.
When they're young, they look like this. Oh, yeah.
Rabbi, look at me. Rabbi, look at me. Look at that beautiful haircut with her hands in
Wow, look at his haircut. Whoa.
Okay, so we're going to the school, right? A lot of like tonic, Shiva tonic, you got so big. Of course, here. Israel, the elf, let's
I know, but
yeah, turn around. Here, we're gonna smile at the picture. Come. Here, we should get it. Thank you. I can't believe how big you got. Did you go on the trampoline today? Which trampoline? Just on a trip.
Where?
No? You're trampoline in the house?
What's that?
Are you a dinosaur? Tell her that you're a dinosaur. You gotta teach me all this. I don't know that. I don't know that. How you feel? Fine. No. But I can finally sit. You know what I got, right? You had it too?
I'll tell you,
But it's horrible. It's horrible.
Do hair and makeup for it. My grandma.
not about all the time.
You guys
You should know this is a good set. It's connected to people, a lot of people here, and everything.
Do you think you should have done this?
My nephew, Wolf,
I would have been the same.
Shelly,
I do wish I did do it earlier because is it okay for you?
he missed out. He was a bar mitzvah.
Yeah,
He was young
that's
enough.
okay.
But it rubbed off, afterwards. So Maureen was.
So they were just swollen. They cut everything but like for 5 years. I got it when I was 7. You call my son fat? And then
You know what I said by his
doubled up. They were like big red. I
Anya, we have that pictures together here too. There's like one, 2 weddings here. No, one picture, you know what? No, you mean that's a red. You don't want to close if you want. We have cameras shot. We have cameras, 2 cameras. No, the main speaker is here. It's like a fundraiser or something.
Oh, especially here. I moved to this neighborhood in 1990. Oh, or how long have they been here?
I say you because I know you're part of it.
Yeah.
3 years?
No. I would say not 10, but close. Yeah. Maybe 7 years. Yeah.
Last time I've been here,
Really? I thought I saw you here. You've never been here before? I mean, you know, obviously they have big plans. Whether that's going to happen or not, I don't know. No, I mean big plans. Because you have a facility there. You know,
they have to do renovation.
they're going to be intimidated. I mean, people park blocks away and then they walk over. Yeah. I mean, it hasn't stopped anybody from coming. You know, I mean, you know, most people wouldn't drive up and park right in front anyway. They would drive, you know, just out of respect, park, you know, a few blocks away. Listen, you know, how long have you been in the Lake? About 13 years. 13. Because I've been here almost 40 years. When I first moved here, you never had public parking. No matter where you went, it was the biggest park. So, I mean, and even, I mean, 40 was still a big city. But
My son, my older son, he lives in Westwood. It's difficult to get there. He moved recently to
completely different. Yeah. Yes. Oh, yes.
It's kind of boring for me.
First of all, they have the space. Yeah. But yes, everything is the same. It does look a little boring. And I think maybe... Yes, and I think when you look at that, huh? No. Yeah. I am They want us to put this into the thing.
You don't want to see the people?
I don't you guys live on my street? Yeah. I don't live there, but I have a house.
Just stay there until it's fixed, until that starts and then come.
gentlemen, thank you for being here. We're going to get started in just about a minute. If you could please take your seats. Thank you very much.
What?
Mine is on.
Yes.
It goes on right away.
Alright, you ready? That's it.
Huh?
If possible, if everyone could just make sure your phone is on silent so we could have a smooth program all the way throughout. To all those watching online, welcome to Los Angeles time. We are late by design. This is Hollywood for Chabad of Los Feliz on Hollywood Boulevard. Late is in fashion.
Yes.
All right, we ready?
Sorry.
All right, good evening. Thank you all for being here tonight. We're gathered here to commemorate the Shloshim, the 30 days since the passing of Rabbi Korf, father of Rabbi Korf. Rabbi was an educator, a mentor, and a revered chassid. And over the last few weeks, an incredible amount of stories from thousands of people have come out. And it's just beginning to shine a light on the far-reaching impact and influence Rabbi Korf had throughout his lifetime. For those who are fortunate to have met him, or even just to be in his presence, you're familiar with this air of focus and authenticity that he would radiate wherever he went. Today, in the world that we live in this modern world where the pace of life is so fast, we're consistently being drawn to different distractions at any given time. We wear screens on our wrist, we carry them in our pocket, we've got them in our car and many other places. It's a rarity to be able to appreciate someone who embodied and personified such a clear focus and clarity in their life. So it's my hope that everyone gathered here, regardless of background or affiliation, we could all draw inspiration from the life and legacy of Rabbi Korf. We're fortunate to have here with us tonight Rabbi's son, Rabbi Leibel Korf, the rabbi here at Chabad Greater Los Feliz, Rabbi Gershon Schisterman, who was a student of Rabbi Korf. And in sharing his background, his life story, we hope that there's a little bit of inspiration and guidance for all of us to be able to take home with us. Today on the Hebrew calendar is Chaf, the 20th of the month of Menachem Av, which is also the anniversary of passing the yahrzeit of Reb Levi Yitzchak Schneerson, the father of the Rebbe. Reb Levi Yitzchak passed away in exile in communist Russia in Alma-Ati, Kazakhstan, where he was a Mesiras Nefesh, his life thrown into prison and into exile by the communists for spreading Judaism. It's a very fitting point and day to be here and to begin talking about the life, the early years of Rabbi Korf. So on that note, Rabbi Korf, if you could please share with us where your father was born and what those early years of his life was like.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Rabbi Perlstein. And thank you all for coming for my father's Shloshim. It really means a lot to me. My father was born in 1935 in the Kharkov, Ukraine. And at a very young age, of course, was brought up in a home dedicated to Hasidism, to true Judaism, and with self-sacrifice. Didn't go to school, and that in itself was self-sacrifice. And when the war started, in 1942, they ran away to an area where a lot of Chabad Hasidim came. Uzbekistan was Farganan was a city, then Samarkand, which was a yeshiva where a lot of the Hasidim were. They were able to develop a big yeshiva, and ultimately escaped Russia with false passports that the Hasidim created, those Polish passports, and they came to a place called Pucking in Germany, a refugee camp. And in this entire journey, all the stories that he told me was how in every step of the way, where I learned how the commitment was so clear, and every moment of that part of his life was not only just so remembered, but created the person that he is. He told me how in Pucking, how he learned by the great Hasidim, before that in Samarkand, a great Chassid, Rabbi Stroll Nevler, who he would talk about, and eventually he went to the beginning of the yeshiva known as Brunois, France, not far from Paris in France. He was there from 46, 47, till 1953. In 1953 is where he talks about what he strived for from the moment he was born, from the moment he was awake, was to go to the Rebbe. And of course, in 1953 is when he came to the Rebbe in Brooklyn, New York, and he went to the yeshiva over there, studied by the Rebbe. In 1955, the Rebbe asked him to go as a yeshiva bacher, but also as a mentor to Montreal, Canada, where there was a yeshiva there. And then after his marriage, after a few years in Newark, again, that's where he went, Montreal, Canada. And we talk about the heydays of my father in his youth, being a great mentor to a lot of great giant Hasidim today, was the 5 years or 6 years that he was in Montreal, Canada, from 1965 to 1970.
So just to put that in perspective, at a young age, how old was he when they fled the first time to Samarkand?
So he was 7 years old or 6 years old.
And from there until he arrives in America was in
17 years old.
17. That whole life was just flight and immigration and escaping border to border until he arrived.
Learning Gemara while his father was weaving and teaching him, and every moment that he could, with great self-sacrifice, was where he, at a late age, I think even 9 years old is when he started really learning. It was so hard. He just studied Tehillim by heart when he was very young. Didn't have a chance to even learn because there was nothing available. But he just used every moment to learn and learn.
You mentioned they had some stability in the years of coming
Rebbe.
to America.
Come to the Rebbe. That was the whole voyage. It was a trip of how do we get to the Rebbe. He's till the final year of his life. Shabbos Parshas Boy, the Shabbos that he saw the Rebbe for the first time, he relives it every single year as that moment that he finally got to his destination, to everything he was striving for in life, to get guidance straight from the Rebbe, to connect to the source of life, of Hasidism, of Torah, of everything he learned, was finally the day that when he arrived at the Rebbe in 1953.
And when they came here to America, did his father find employment? Was there...
His father was famous about his Korf's Matzah bakery. His father was very resourceful in that sense, that he decided as soon as he came, after being a shochet in France, decided to open up a matzah bakery. The Rebbe encouraged him a lot. The Rebbe liked the fact that someone with a God-fearing Jew like he was, to be the one doing the matzah bakery from 1953, I think all the way to 1980 is when he had it. And eventually it was sold and it was run by other people.
So your father comes to America as a teenager, and then as a young adult he's sent to Montreal, and then he comes back to America, gets married, and then went into education right away?
Right away went to education. He told the Rebbe, I want to go on shlichus, because the Rebbe was so much talking about that he wanted people to go and open up Chabad centers, open up Chabad. There wasn't Chabad houses yet. And he told the Rebbe, every time he told the Rebbe that he wanted to do it, the Rebbe told him that what you're doing right now, if you just do it with devotion, and you are doing it for the person who sent you out, then you're a shliach as well.
And by that meaning education?
The education that he was in. Yeah,
Wow.
the Rebbe always wanted him to stay in education.
So where did he start? Where he was teaching in Crown Heights?
In Crown Heights, Olei Torah, eventually he went to Newark, then he came back to Crown Heights, and then eventually Montreal.
Wow. Okay, so then he makes it to Montreal, where now Rabbi Schusterman, that's where you come into the story. You were a student then in the yeshiva in Montreal. Was that your first year there? How did you get to Montreal as a student?
I only learned in Montreal 1 year, 1965, or it was Tufshin Chaf Hey, which began a couple of months at the end of 64 until summer of 65. So a 10-month period. And that was providentially also the time, I don't know, when did your father come?
Around then.
I think
Around that.
1965, right around then, right?
Now, I used to tease him that I trained him because we were the guinea pigs and he was the one working on us. And we got along very well.
Define working on us. What was your relationship with him in that year?
So, if I may be so bold, I'm going to refer to him as Pinny, because that's what we called him. Maybe to his face we called him Rapinya, but behind his back he was always Pinny. And by Hasidim, the mashpiyim, the Hasidic teachers, the mentors, were not given formal titles. There's actually talks from the Rebbe on why that practice was such. One of the reasons is because they were humble and it was very informal. The Rebbe also said that, interestingly enough, that when a chassid sees himself as an extension of the Rebbe, and you feel that, then to call him with titles in the presence of the aura of the Rebbe that goes along with him, it's not appropriate. Anyway, he was a mashgiach more than in Montreal, the year that I was there, he wasn't a teacher that had a classroom which he prepared, classes to teach Mamorim or Gemara. He was the one who stood in front of the room where there were 50 or 60 Bachim learning. He made sure that they were focused on what they were doing. If not, he encouraged them, and he also answered their questions. And if you have 60 Bachim, you can be busy all the time. You can, and that's what a mashgiach does. He's there to serve the Bachrim, and mashgiach actually means, you may know the term mashgiach from a kosher hashgacha, which is supervision, but he was a moral and ethical and Hasidic supervision on the Bachrim. He verbringed, which I'm sure you know what a verbringen is. He would get together, whether on a special holiday or on Shabbos, and they would say a few l'chaims, and he would talk about subjects that were inspiring and encouraging. 1965 was, I did the math, 56 years ago. So my relationship with him primarily took place during a 10-month period 56 years ago. And you would think, well, that was a fleeting moment in a lifetime, his or mine, but not at all. And I don't think I'm unique. We bonded, and I'll say why in a moment. And we had, to put it in the vernacular, he became a role model, which I've still running in place to try to keep up with him. And he became a hero in the sense that he set a standard. And his standard was not by what he did as much as by who he was. And who he was expressed itself in everything that he did. When he spoke to you, when you speak to a person, you read their body language, you can read their mind, if they're pompous or they're humble, if they care for you or they care about making a good impression on you. Their sincerity, we all do it. Some of us do it better than others, but we all evaluate people we meet. In the first few minutes, we come to a decision of if this relationship is worth pursuing. Pinya was, you use the word authentic, sincere, humble. He represented his commitment to what was higher than him. And when you hung out with him, you got affected and inspired by that which inspired him.
So there's a quote that I saw going around. It's attributed to Reb Peretz Mushkin. He says that Rapinya reminded him of the Bachurim, the sincerity of the Bachurim in the old town shtetl of Lubavitch from, the, as he says, the good old days. Describe that sincerity. What was that experience like sitting with him one-on-one?
Sitting with him one-on-one, whether it was me or the many other Bachurim who sat with him one-on-one. Interestingly enough, in 1965, the term OTD, off the derech, a young person who may be on the inside looking out more than he should be, straying from the narrow path, the bubble that we are meant to incubate in the formative years in yeshiva, but there are those who have bigger eyes and different aspirations. These people, in some places, they're shunned. And in Montreal, in Tufshin Chafei, there weren't many such Bachrim. They found themselves a loving place at Pinny's little table up front. He would go over to them, how you doing? Do you know the Gemara that you're learning? Not so well. Come. I have to be on top. I have to be in the front. But come, pull over a chair. I'll learn with you a piece of Gemara. And this gave these guys such a sense of, hey, he cares for me. He wants me to know the Gemara. He wants me to know the Mimer. There's an expression that I don't care how much you know, but until I know how much you care. Everybody knew that Pinny cared for you. But Beruchnius, if he saw a bacher who was wearing a shabby jacket, he would say, how come you don't have a better jacket? And he would speak. There was somebody in the yeshiva who had imported suits. He would get him a suit. That was the kind of person that he was. In Lubavitch, that Rabbi Mushkin was referring to, that was the ultimate bubble. There was nothing else happening in their life except the yeshiva. Lubavitch wasn't a big city, it was a small town, but somebody said that he was in Lubavitch for 6 years, and all he knew was the yeshiva. There was a few blocks to go to the mikveh, only that little path for 6 years. And he wasn't constrained, that was his life. Montreal 1965 was a little different. The world today is completely different. But he represented the world of truth that Chassidus represents, that Yiddishkeit represents. He lived it, and anyone who dealt with him or he dealt with was touched by that magnetism, by that light, by that warmth, by that fire. After Chaf Hey, I bumped into him periodically. After I moved to California in '71, the periodically was less periodical. But when I came to New York once or twice or 3 times a year, when he came here to California, when his son moved here, he would come once or twice, or when there was a simcha. We always made it our business to get together, even for 15 minutes. Relationships require 2 ingredients in various proportions, frequency and intensity. Everybody has friends from 30, 40 years ago who the friendship then was so intense, maybe from yeshiva or from college or from some great summer, and you stayed friends. And now, even if you don't see each other for 3 years or 5 years, but when you get together, you don't have to be reintroduced. You go right into that relationship. That was an intense relationship that stays permanently, even if it's infrequent. And then there are people you see every day in shul or in your office or something like that. Not very intense, but the frequency makes up the relationship. Providentially, I had that intensity in 1965, and 56 years later, it is still fresh.
Wow.
It is fresh in me, and I'm sure I speak for hundreds of others who had the same experience with him.
Well, thank you. I mean, we're going to go now from the intensity to the frequency. Where
When I was home.
Rapinha, just looking at the picture, it's someone who exudes holiness and clarity and the authenticity that you were describing.
And warmth and friendliness.
The list is definitely growing, but there's something in particular I want to try and touch on, is this character, this image that we're describing that everyone's now understanding of Rapinha. This is what I would think was Rapinha as everyone got to know him in the different schools and different classes and the different educational capacities that he was active in. At home, what was it like being with the person who, anyone who was in Crown Heights knew Rapinha on the street, go hustling from one class to the other. He was always moving, was the person who never rested. What was it like growing up in the house with the person in the city that never rests?
He never rested. He never rested at home either. You couldn't find him at home like doing nothing. First of all, you know, his Seder Yeshiva was that he would come home when I was a kid from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, because that was the break of the yeshiva. So we basically made it home for maybe 50 minutes or probably 40 minutes, because, you know, from 7 o'clock, maybe 7:05, he would come home if there was a bus and leave 10 to 8. The intense time that he was there, we all sat by the table to eat supper with him. We ate already. Every time he would have the same amount that he would read from the Lubavitch Rebbe's, the previous Rebbe's memoirs. There was always something at the table that he would share with us. For us at home, time with my father was always, it was important. Everything was important that he did. And there was no wasting time. So if everybody else not in yeshiva went out to put on film Friday afternoon, my father was putting on film Friday afternoon. Obviously, if my mother needed help at home, or the time that, you know, if she gave birth or something, someone wasn't feeling well, he would be home maybe. But there was no time wasted. His shiurim at home started at 6 o'clock in the morning. I would hear it in my bed. I was already learning with one group from 6 to 6:30, one 6:30 to 7, and then he went to yeshiva. And afterwards at home, the yeshiva baruch would knock on the door, and we used to have a small home, and I was actually sleeping in the living room. I would wake up. My father's farbrengas were an hour or two, but he would wake up middle of the night because they knocked on the door. They wanted farbreng.
Was there room to be a child in this space? Could you do childish things in the presence of such a person?
Of course. My father loved us as children, but our relationship was very real. In other words, he talked to us authentic things. Look, just to think about me, as a very young age, he allowed me to be hanging out at 770, which wasn't necessarily what he would try to teach his children to learn to live a very pneumistic, authentic life of studying and internalizing chassidus, not spiritual inspirations of. But I did that. I liked running for the spiritual inspirations. But he supported me a lot. He asked me what was going on there. He always was encouraging me, and every time at home, we just loved every moment with him there because it was real. Even if it wasn't for bringing with yeshiva bachram there, he always sat us next to him and gave us the attention, took us to yeshiva, took us 770, took us along with him to work, if that was the right time, and just let us experience him. We just saw a person at home that we were in awe of, that loved us, but every moment with us was a real moment.
Were your interactions with him, though, in the lens of how he was focused in his mission, or was he relating to you as the individual?
So first of all, my father in his entire life lived a life of mission. Everything he did was, what's my purpose? But never did he make that judgment to anyone else. In other words, people came to our house, middle of Shabbos table, and walked in with a suitcase sometime. Like, it's Shabbos. My father's love to a Yid doesn't matter to any person, doesn't matter his level of religiosity or observance, but it was true love. It wasn't a fake. It wasn't like, oh, we have to be nice to them. Same thing was to his children. All of us, all 10 of us, had an unbelievable education that it wasn't expecting me to be him ever. He was always encouraging me to look for emes, to look for truth, and saw me who I was at the table. Every Shabbos table was a serious Shabbos table. We went around the table, everybody said something, but he, of course, led that. And I definitely experienced a day-to-day how everything I do could have importance, could have something significant. There was no wasting time. There was always that intensity that he talks about. So we weren't chat on the phone like when I was in California. He wasn't a person for schmoozing on the phone. But every time he came here, every time we went there, or every time we drove, it was a very intense conversation.
So you mentioned the order and the structure that he adhered to, scheduling, classes, going from here to there. One of the things that I heard over the last few weeks, I'm sitting by the Shiva, was this common theme that no matter what time it was or where he was, if someone needed help or there was a request, he was there. There was no when it come to helping others. How did that play out in the day-to-day in your home?
Actually, remember one time somebody went to jail, or some Israeli guy, and my father, that they given help him, asked my father for help. He runs to the drawer collecting $500, and he's gone. Before my mother was like telling him, reasoning like, why should it be you? Call some. He was just there and he left. In other words, there was no such thing by him as saying no if someone needs something. I remember going to 770 collecting because someone told him he's in desperate need of something. He was, if any bacher, a yeshiva student that was kicked out of yeshiva, a person that was had a problem with finances, anything that was wrong with someone, we watched our father constantly, and my mother trying to reason with him. Maybe it's not the right exact thing to do, but obviously she was the partner with him in this. But it was definitely something which I saw day to day. If someone wants something, there was no saying no to help someone else. That was clear by him. He never felt too tired. You know, I was just thinking myself. I was once dancing over here. I took one of my children on my shoulders, and I was dancing. And after a while, it started hurting me. Then I reminded myself, we used to go for a walk at the Halucha from 770, Brooklyn to Borough Park. I remember I was tired once, asked my father to take me on the shoulders. He did. But I don't remember him telling me that he was too tired, I should get down. And I just remembered, like 30 years later, maybe he was tired then when he carried me. Dude, he never said no. He
So
didn't tell
there
me
had
get-
to be
get
a
off my
no
shoulder.
somewhere. With someone who's so disciplined, what were the lines? What were the things that you couldn't engage
He
with
didn't
him?
say no, but we wouldn't bullshit. It wasn't like, sit by the table and like,
Bullshit, define.
just talk about nothing. Talk about other people. Talk about nothingness. Like he didn't care to talk about everything else in the world just for the sake of talking. Someone told me the other day, when the Iran hostages were in time of Carter. I was too young then, but this Bacher told me, you keep running into yeshiva, excited, Rabbi Korf, whatever is his name. The Iran hostages, they were free. So my father says, which hostages? so for him, it wasn't like he was careless about them. If it's not something he needs to know, then he doesn't have to know it. But if it's something he needs to know, he would.
Was this a version or I would say the lack of engagement with, so to speak, the modern world by design because he was opposed to it, or more that it just wasn't a
Absolutely
vital
not.
role?
He was fascinated when he found of something that you could use for Torah and for betterance of other people and helping other people. But if it's not his job, if it's not something for him to do, he woke up in the morning, what am I needed for? For my family, for my children, for people. That's all I want to know. Give it to me and I'll do it. If it was the technology when he couldn't see anymore, he was sitting at 770 and moving this iPad and using technology because he couldn't read the Gemara. But he was not opposed to anything modern. He just was not going to use it unless it's needed.
Wow. So I just want to touch on a point now quickly. There's an episode that sort of is a defining moment in your father's life that I'm sure many here have heard about. And it's not defining, God forbid, because of the negative actions that were perpetrated or that had taken place that he was a victim to. More, I want to focus on the response that he had and his mindset that he maintained throughout his life about this episode. So if you could just bring everyone up to speed about this event that took place in Brooklyn, 1983, that your father played a key role in.
So my father never said no to anybody, as you know. And I remember when I was very young, 1983, I was born in 72, so I was just 11 years old then. And he was asked by some people in the Satmar community to learn Tanya with him. Rabbi Vechter called him initially, and then things got too hard. He said, you have to go to Rabbi Khan, who just recently passed away, and learn with him. And then eventually people started asking him to learn with him. In 1983, I actually was Friday walking on Kingston Avenue, and I was looking for somewhere to go put on film with people called Miftzayim, Outreach. My father said, come with me, I'm going to learn Tanya with someone. And I didn't take his invitation because I wanted to go to the more exciting places in Manhattan and put on film with people. So my father went there, and it was ambushed by many people. It's very sad what happened, because they were trying to hold back people from becoming Chabadniks or whatever. My father was doing it with purity, because somebody invited him, and they put him to the floor and they cut off his beard, which was a terrible act. And the Rebbe was so defensive of my father, spoke about it in public, as hardly speaks about people in public, mentions my father's name, which is something which is like you compared him to Pinchas, the zealot in the time of the Torah, because of his name. And it was just some time that you would think of my father as the hero of Chabad who has done this. And I saw my father very humble, just felt undeterred to continue living what is meant to do. And if it's not this thing, he'll do something else and just share the light of Hasidus, share the light of everything. And he would never and ever like look at it as a personal grudge of someone else. I know there was a court case which he didn't want me to go. They were trying to press charges. And they asked my father obviously wouldn't say 1,000%, he knows this person. So they asked his attacker, are you a religious Jew? And he said, Alta, very, very religious. And they asked my father, are you religious? He said, I try. So here's a person that tries, and there's the person that's ultra, and
Wow.
you see the situation. So that was the comical situation.
Did he carry any grudge towards these people throughout his life?
It's
Or?
funny you asking because just a few years ago there was one of the people that attacked him that got into some kind of legal. Obviously, it wasn't his only wrong thing that he did in his life, and he got into a legal problem. And he came to my father's house to ask for forgiveness, hoping that would take away his bad
This
aura
is
on him.
20-something years later.
Yeah. So my father said to him, "You didn't do anything to me. You did something to Lubavitch. Go to the oil of the Rebbe and ask the Rebbe forgiveness. To me, you've done nothing." He never saw himself as a person of his own. He only saw himself as someone fulfilling a mission, and that's what he saw it as.
Wow. Wow. Rabbi Shisterman, bring this all together with a nice little story from your memories.
As I started saying before, some people, when you talk about them, you talk about what they did. In his case, everything that he did flowed from who he was. There's a word from the Friediger Rebbe, Chacham Mahu Oimer, a wise man. What he is, that expresses itself in how he speaks. And the same thing, Russia taught me. One story that stands out in my mind was when I was at a Farbrengen. I can even tell the time. It was Motzei Shabbos Parshas Vayechi in Topshin Chafei.
Give it to us in some kind of timeline of 1965, some Saturday night. Okay?
Just about.
For those who don't know what's a
It
Shabbos.
was. I chose the wrong year to go to learn in yeshiva in Montreal, which started a month before Rosh Hashanah, and then 6 days after Rosh Hashanah, the Rebbe's mother passed away, and that initiated the Rebbe's Farbrengen every Shabbos, which prior to that, the Rebbe Farbrengen usually once a month, once in a while, an extra Shabbos, and I missed out on so many Farbrengens, but I was already committed to that program. And in Montreal, the world has changed technologically. Motzei Shabbos, there was a program on the radio where they gave over 50 in New York, and somehow we were able to hear a 15-minute synopsis of the Farbrengen. And there was one point at that Farbrengen, a very interesting point, that when Yaakov met Yosef after not having seen each other for 22 years, it was Yosef and Binyamin, that they cried on each other's shoulders. And Rashi says each one was crying about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash that was ordained to happen in the future in the other one's section of Eretz Yisrael, Binyamin and Yosef. And the Rebbe asked, if both of them had destructions, why weren't they crying about their own destruction? Why was each one crying about the other one's destruction? And the Rebbe's answer was, about your own destruction, don't cry, act. On someone else's destruction, you can cry. After you do your best to help, then you can cry, and that's your empathy. That was the theme of that Shabbos Farbrengen. There was one boy in yeshiva who was struggling to be a yeshiva bacher, came from a very fine background, but he couldn't quite figure it out. He was a good guy, he learned well, but he wasn't sure who he was. And when that sikha was given over to us, Rapinya was Farbrengen, and he took that little vignette from the Rebbe's talk, and in Yiddish the word is tzukait. He chewed it up and gave it out in little pieces to the guys around the table, how that applies to yeshiva bachrim. And there was that boy that night was one of the recipients of Pinchas, and he found the right words to touch his heart. And that night, and he told me that years later too, that night transformed his life. His direction that was diffused and uncertain got focused, and he passed away a year or two ago, but that was the pivotal moment in his life. So that stands out in my mind. His Farbrengens weren't dramatic. He didn't, but his Farbrengens were personal, short and sweet. He found the right key to each person's heart with simple words. I don't mean not simplistic, but simple and sincere words. No, he knew the guys. He knew them. He knew what they needed, and he found the right caring words to open their heart. And okay.
Well, thank you. Rabbi Korf, you, in the last few years, your relationship with your father definitely took on a new dimension. The last year or two, caring for him, traveling there to be with him. Was there anything in that period that stands out that you took away?
Like I said before, our lessons from him was the way he lived. Was authentic. Everything he did was authentic. Obviously, he suffered a lot in the last over a year from the first time he got COVID and the Guillain-Barré that followed that. And we finally were able to be with him. And you have to imagine that when a person is just can't move any limb of his body a lot of the time, and he was so really suffering, but he never expressed any complaint about the suffering to us. All the conversation with us was the time of the davening and the learning of the Torah portions for that day, and to say it correctly if I didn't say the exact amount, how I was observing my Shabbat and how I was doing his washing of the hands, my washing of the hands, and he just cared about his regular day of prayer and observance to Hashem. And when I thought to myself, when you want to be authentic, and there's nothing holding you back right now, and he was praying. When he said the Shema, when he said the Amidah, it didn't matter that he could only move or drop his head, but his closing of his eyes and his praying was as intense as he's standing right now in 770 and praying. And to me, it was just like, if there's anything of that he left me with in terms of his emes, there is no world, there's no inhibitions, there's nothing that stops you from when you're focused of what you have to do. You could be lying in bed over here, and everything is sort of in the way of what you want to do. Every possibility that he could do, he did it to its exact amount. I had to tell him, please do not do so much intensity because your blood pressure is going high and your heart rate is going high, and please, don't, you're scaring me. But he would just do everything in every moment that he was there. He exuded such a profound lesson to me as a child. Just label wherever you are and whatever you're doing. Doesn't matter. It's not like if you're uncomfortable, it's not exactly your location, if you don't feel the moment, maybe I'm not going to daven so perfectly, maybe I'm not going to learn so perfectly, maybe I don't have to wash this exactly as I want, or as I have to do it, or eat the amount of challah I need to make the blessing. To him, there's nothing in the time of your life that's too difficult for you to do what your purpose is. And he knew his purpose so clear, and he gave it to me so profoundly at the last few times that I was with him.
In closing, and before we begin the main event, by the way, there are a lot more chairs if anyone wants. Make yourself comfortable. We're in it for the long haul. But I'm compelled to say that anyone gathered here who's gotten to know Rabbi Korf, Rebbetzin Korf, I used the term earlier that your father is often described as a person who never rested. Anyone who's gotten to know you both in your work here at Chabad Greater Los Feliz, in your holy shlichus that you do, would say that you embody that to the fullest. If there's ever a Jew that needs help, if there's anything that could be done to make this world a better place, a dir le'isparech, a dwelling place for God, Rabbi and Rebbetzin Korf are there on the button, no matter the time, no matter the place. And it's clear that your father's legacy is living on through you, your family, your siblings, and God willing, may we be reunited with him very soon with the coming of Mashiach, and may you your family continue to have health, wealth, and all the strength to be able to be successful in your holy shlichus. Thank you, Rabbi Korf. Thank you, Rabbi Schusterman.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
All right. Now we're in for a treat. The main event we have with us, this is a rarity. In my almost 6 years here in Los Angeles, this is only the second time I have the great fortune of being in his presence here in the holy city of Los Angeles. But we have with us here tonight Rabbi Shais Taub, a world-renowned speaker, popular columnist, and best-selling author. He serves as a scholar in residence at Chabad of the Five Towns in Long Island, New York, and he directs the Torah website online called soulwords.org, where you can see hundreds of his classes on all different amazing subjects. Rabbi Taub has an unbelievable way of bringing subjects and topics of the modern world and Hasidus into a digestible fashion. Personally, my favorite is Spotify, where you can get all his podcasts. Definitely subscribe. Without further ado, Rabbi Taub. Oh, wait, Rabbi Korf actually was very clear on this. I have to explain. You would think that a memorial would be just sharing stories about Rapinya Korf. There's no better memorial or tribute to Rabbi Korf, because if he was sitting here on the stage, his first question would be like, you're talking about me, what's everyone walking away with? Let them learn something, let them hear something holy, and with no further ado, Rabbi Taub.
Adjust this. Can we? Yeah, that good? Yeah. Tell me, can they hear me? If they can hear me, it's good. Yeah, in the back, they hear me? What? Louder? I'll bring it closer. Now it's good? Okay, very good. So I got up this morning at 3:30 a.m. New York time, which is 12:30 a.m. California time, in order to get the flight out here to LA. Good to be back in Los Angeles. And so my day started almost coming close to 24 hours ago, and I thought it occurred to me as I was traveling. I said, you know, there's probably no more fitting preparation for a memorial event for Rapinya Korf than to arrive utterly sleep deprived. Because if you know anything about Rapinya's life, he slept very, very, very little, and seemed to be a fountain of endless energy, always running around. I always saw him moving around. It was almost like there had to have been two Rapinyas, because you would see him at two opposite sides of the neighborhood on Shabbos. And he would just, you know, it seemed Fabrengen in 770, and then you would see him in the Mesivta on Troy, and he was just everywhere. Speaking of his lack of sleep, by the way, I'll tell you something that I heard firsthand. It didn't happen to me, but I know the guy it happened to. A guy who became Lubavitch after he got married. So he didn't know any Chassidus. He became Lubavitch after he got married, and he had never learned Chabad Chassidus. So he was living in Crown Heights. He said, I got to catch up. I never learned in a Lubavitch yeshiva. I never learned Chassidus. So what should I do? So they told the guy, go to Rapinya. He will learn with anybody. Just go tell him you want to learn with him, he'll learn with you. So this guy, I think he was like in his 20s, he had just gotten married. He goes to Rapinya and he says, I need to learn Chassidus, you know, catch me up, give me the give me the basic class. So he says, looking back on it, it was such a chutzpah. But instead of asking this venerable rabbi, when is good for you? When can I? He said to him, you know, the only time I have is at 6 a.m. So the Rapinya said, no problem, you'll come to me 6 a.m. And he used to come to the Rapinya's house. He said 6 in the morning. And he said it occurred to him after a while, many times, that very often, when he'd be arriving at 6 a.m., the Rapinya had been fabrenging. We mentioned, Rabbi Schusterman mentioned the fabrengens in Montreal, fabrenging with the Bachram. A fabrengen has no end time. So a fabrengen can go to the wee hours. So this young man, he said, it occurred to me after a while, I'd be showing up to his house at 6 a.m. He just got home at 4, at 5 a.m. He hadn't slept. But whatever he had been doing the night before, he'd put on a pot of coffee. That was it. We'd sit down, and we would learn. So, and that was his life. It was just like constantly like clockwork, there for others, on everybody else's schedule. And, okay, so I was talking about I got up at 3:30 in the morning. So then I had another little moment. I'll tell you about Rapinya, how I was thinking about him. So I got up at 3:30. So 4 o'clock, I went to get the Uber. And Uber is not like it used to be. It's like, so first of all, it says the only car is 15 minutes away. Okay, fine, all right. You know, I'm a little bit of a nervous traveler, so I left extra time. So I wasn't in such a rush, but okay, fine, I'll wait the 15 minutes. I waited 15 minutes, and then it canceled on me. Oh, no. So I ordered another one. Okay? So this one, another 15 minutes away. Now it's getting close. And I see the guy, he's going farther away from my house. I don't know what the shtick is that they do now with the Uber drivers, but they like go away from your house and they make you cancel it. There's something, I don't know what the shtick is, but there's something. So I called the guy, and I was like, what are you doing? You're going away from my house. I see you driving. He's like, I'll be there. Don't worry. I said, I'm trying to catch a plane. He said, okay, don't worry. I see the guy driving away from my house. I'm starting to get nervous. I'm thinking to myself, I got to catch this flight. I got to be in L.A. tonight. I got to talk about Pinchas Korf. And all of a sudden, it occurred to me, like, the incredible irony. I'm sitting here stressing out about a ride to an airport. I'm thinking to myself, I'm stressing to get a flight to go talk about a man who I do not believe that he ever stressed about catching a flight, about an Uber, about any of these things. The world to him, I'll tell you a story. Actually, I happen to know from Rabbi Korf, the visa, the passport story. You want to hear it was an El Al flight. Well, which airline? It was TWA, all of a show. Okay, so he was he was flying TWA. You remember the airline, okay? Because he was flying to Eretz Yisrael. He was going to Israel, and he was davening. And you know, when they begin the descent, so everyone has to sit down. So the flight attendant comes by and says, excuse me, sir, you have to sit down. He was in the middle of the Shemoneh Esrei, you know, the standing prayer. You're not allowed to respond. You're not allowed to. So not that he was being spiteful. He was such a gentle, sweet, humble man. Okay, he was not causing trouble. But if you're in the middle of davening, you're in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei, you're in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei, what can you do? So apparently they started to freak out. They thought he was being insolent or whatever it was. And by the time he landed, they brought the authorities on board. They confiscated his passport. They took him aside into a room for interrogation. Finally, they cleared it up. They decided he wasn't a threat or anything. Okay? But I'm thinking to myself, here's a guy, you know, think to yourself, you know, you're in the middle of davening. They're going to take away your passport in a foreign country. At the very least, you daven faster, you know, at the very least. For an opinion, that's not what you do. If you're in the middle of davening, you daven. So while I was waiting for the Uber, I decided, you know what, I have my phone in my hand. So I opened up Chabad.org and I went to the daily study and I did Tanya Chitas. And I said, you know what, that's a better, I'll learn today's Tanya. Oh, by the way, there's a new Tanya shir starting, right? When is the new Tanya shir starting? Every Tuesday, the Pinchas Tanya shir, 4 classes, 4-week overview of Tanya. So I learned Tanya, and well, obviously I'm here. I made it here. So Baruch Hashem, I felt like that was a better way to conduct myself than to refresh the Uber app every 10 seconds and see if the car was closer. By the way, that guy canceled in the end too. So, but I learned Tanya, and I'm here. So Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, the wisest of all men, said that the point of attending a house of mourning is v'hachai yitin al libai, which means the living shall take it to heart. That means that, of course, there's a place for grief and for a sense of loss, especially for the family, and for all those touched by the departed. But excuse me. But primarily, maybe, can I get a cup for the water? Maybe it'll help me out here while I'm. There's a full bottle, but the opinion wouldn't like if I would drink from the bottle, so never mind what I do at home when I'm not. But the opinion Shloshim, you have to. The living shall take it to heart means that primarily when we think of the life of someone who has passed on into the world of truth, we should try to think about the way that person lived. Thank you. Primarily, the Jewish response to the loss of a great person is to think about how they lived their life and to make practical plans how to implement some of that in our lives. How to be a little bit more like that person. And I know for a lot of people who knew that Pinya, I mean, I can say this. I hope I can say this. A lot of people felt, people respected him, but they felt maybe his level was unattainable. And I don't think he would be happy to hear that people don't think they can do what he did. And I think he would be very happy to hear that each of us on our own level is trying our best. I try. I try. Each one of us on our own level is trying our best to be a little bit like him. So that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about this personality and how we can, on our own level, each one of us try to be that way. You know, I mentioned how Rabbi Pinya was unflappable. You couldn't get under his skin. You couldn't rattle him. This world, things of this world just didn't have an effect on him. Like the story with the passport on the plane. I wasn't going to bring it up, but I heard during the interview you mentioned the violent assault that your father was a victim of. Rabbi Pinya was a cute little guy. He was a sweet, had an angelic face. I don't know how tall he was, maybe 5'4". He was a small, sweet, lovely man. But he was very, very tough. You mentioned that violent assault. I don't know if you know this story. I know this story from the other side. Someone from the community who assaulted him told me that there's someone who is religious today because he was in the gang who assaulted your father. I was at a Shabbaton, which was mostly Hungarian Chassidim, Satmar Chassidim. And a guy took me aside and he said, I don't want to give too much details, but he says, my uncle was a bacher in that, he was a yeshiva boy in that time. He was not a big learner. He was not really involved in much productive. He liked action. So when he heard that there was a gang getting together to beat up some Lubavitcher, he said that could be interesting, that could be fun. So he tagged along. And he said he wasn't part of the actual violence, but he was there, he was present. He said when they were holding him down to cut his beard, he was holding on to his beard with his hand so they couldn't do it. And the scissors were going onto his fingers. And they saw they're going to have to, you know, they were ready to beat him up. They're ready to cut his beard. They didn't want to cut off a finger. They didn't want to go that far, whatever. And he screams out, Pinya screams out, Schneider up die fingers. Aber nicht chappen de Bord. Cut off my fingers. Don't touch my beard. He was pleading with them, begging with them. This guy who was in this gang, he said, I never saw a Jew who took spirituality, who took Torah and mitzvahs so seriously that in the moment of a fight or flight, the moment of the adrenaline rush, the moment where the survival instinct kicks in, and he's thinking more about his beard than his fingers. He said this blew him away. And from that day on, I told you, his involvement in Judaism was very tenuous at that point. This guy who went along with the gang totally changed his life. You ever heard this before? I heard it from a relative of the guy who it happened to. So you don't realize how many Talmidim your father had. Different types of Talmidim. So he was a tough guy. A real tough guy. I mean, he had to be. You know how he grew up. He grew up in the underground. There was life and death. There was literally the threat of torture, of exile, execution at every moment. That's what he grew up in. So he was a tough guy. At the same time, he was the sweetest, most humble, most harmless, gentle person you could ever meet. A few years ago, somebody posted on Facebook, and it was going around on WhatsApp. They took a screenshot. Opinion wouldn't know what's a screenshot, what's WhatsApp, what's Facebook. Although I remember he had his tablet. But I looked on his tablet, and he was learning Gemara on the tablet. In the last few years, he had a tablet, and he would learn Gemara on his tablet. There was a Facebook post which was going around on social media. A guy in Crown Heights posts, he says, I was pushing a stroller with my twin toddlers. This guy had twin boys. I was pushing the stroller down Kingston Avenue. That's like the main drag in Crown Heights. And he says, one of my kids, one of my twins, is like swinging his foot outside of the stroller. And as we go by, I see we're passing somebody. He said, I didn't notice at first who it is. And my little boy kicks his foot, and he kicks the bag. Somebody's holding a bag, like walking down Kingston Avenue holding a bag, like a shopping bag. And my little boy kicks the bag. And I look up, and whose bag did he kick? Rapinha. Rapinha's walking down Kingston Avenue holding a bag, whatever's in the bag. And this little toddler in the stroller just kicked the bag. So the father says, I look at my son, and I say you're sorry. So he says, before I can blink, he hears Rapinha say, I'm sorry, my bag hit your son's foot. So, what do you do with this? How do you paint the picture of somebody who, with this gvura, this strength and this toughness and this tenacity on one hand, and just this sweet, gentle softness and humility on the other hand? It's a little bit of a contrast, a little bit of a, a study in paradox. So, it occurred to me that today is Chof Av. Chof Av is the yortzeit of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's father, Rav Levi Yitzchok, the great rabbi and Kabbalist, Jewish leader. The Rebbe's father's teachings were very, very, very deep. He used to write Kabbalah. And to the extent that nobody really could understand his teachings. In fact, there's a story that once the Rebbe's father was giving a class in Dnepropetrovsk, and he saw that nobody could understand. And he said, keiner versteht nicht, nobody's understanding. He says, aber der Jingel versteht. And he pointed to the back, says, that little boy understands. And who was it? It was the Rebbe. So the Rebbe's father used to teach on such a level that who understood? The Rebbe understood. And nevertheless, the Rebbe would take his father's teachings and make them accessible to all of us. And when I say all of us, I mean really all of us. In Tavshin Mem Tes, that's 1989, the summer of 89. So customarily, the camps, this date, Chof Av, the 20th of Av, is always in the summer. It's during camp time. So customarily, the camps would come in from the mountains, from the country, and they would go to 770, and there would be a gathering, and the Rebbe would say a sicha, the Rebbe would say a public address to the children, to the campers, to kids. Can you imagine that? The Rebbe would teach to the children. Say a sicha for children. So, Chaf of this day, Tavshim Mem Tes 1989, the Rebbe said a sicha to children, where the Rebbe said, my father's teachings are very deep Kabbalah, but we could bring it down, and we could explain it in such a way that not only children, and the Rebbe is speaking to children in this address, not only children can understand these ideas, but they can apply them. That's a pretty tall order. Taking Kabbalah, that the Rebbe's father himself said nobody understood it except for the Rebbe, and the Rebbe is saying we're going to take these ideas and bring it down, that not only children can understand it, but children can apply it. So the Rebbe said, there's a teaching from my father on a Mishnah. And you should understand that the style of the Rebbe's father, which is also the style of the Rebbe, is that everything in Torah, every subject, every angle is consistent and coexists on one straight line of truth. So that if something is true according to Kabbalah, to the deepest mystical secrets of the universe, it's also going to be true on the most simple, practical, halachic level as well. Therefore, you can take any teaching that is legalistic and you can find the mystical. You can take any teaching that's mystical and you can find the legalistic. And, and vice versa, and back and forth again, and lather, rinse, repeat, like we say. And that's a lot of what the Rebbe's father did, and that's what the Rebbe did as well. So the Rebbe said, there's a teaching from my father on the Mishnah that one says on a yortzeit. A chof of, the Rebbe had yortzeit for his father. Happens to also be the Mishnah that one who's in the year of mourning says 3 times a day, once after each tefillah, each prayer service, Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv. In general, we learn Mishnah, the teachings of the oral Torah, for the ascent of a soul, because the word Mishnah has the same Hebrew letters as neshama, soul. So we learn Mishnah, and I believe last night in Crown Heights there was a Siyum HaMishnayos. They finished the entire Mishnah in honor of Rabbi. Then within the Mishnah itself, there's one place where you find a chapter, or rather a paragraph, one after the other, which starts with the letters of neshama. So one paragraph starts with a nun, and the next paragraph starts with a shin, and the next with a mem, and then the next with a hey. And that's at the very end of mikvahs. Mikvahs is a Mishnah, is a tractate about mikvah, about ritual purity that is brought on by the immersion pool known as mikvah. So at the very end of mikvahs, they have the acronym neshama spelled out, and that last paragraph, the one that starts with hey, hitbul boy es hamita, one who immerses a bed. There's a bed which contracts ritual impurity, and you have to immerse it in a mikvah. I saw the plans for the building. They're going to build a mikvah here. I don't think you're going to let people immerse beds, right? Probably not. Okay. At least not with an appointment. Not without an appointment. Okay. The last part of that Mishnah, this is the part that the Chazan says out loud. And maybe you noticed at the end of Mincha, when Rabbi Korf said it, and if you stick around for Ma'ariv, you'll hear it as well. But the last sentence of that Mishnah is, Machat shehi nasuna al mailas hamayra. Here's the case. There's a needle which is placed on the steps going down to a cave. So you splish splash, I think is the technical term, the water to and fro. Kavin sha'avr Allah hagal, when the wave passes over the needle, tahira. The halachic status of the needle is now purified. Okay, what's this case? First, I'm going to tell you the basic, literal, concrete level, and then I'm going to tell you what the Rebbe taught in the name of his father on the Kabbalistic level that could be understood and applied by children. You with me? Okay. The literal case is like this. Somebody has a needle, and the needle contracted ritual impurity. How did it contract ritual impurity? I don't know. I mean, we don't really pay attention to these laws today because we don't have the ashes of the red heifer to purify us from contamination from contact with a corpse. But when they had the ashes of the red heifer, and God willing, very soon, when Mashiach comes, we'll have again. So this is a whole section of law, of halacha, in Judaism about ritual impurity and purity. So this needle contracted ritual impurity. Okay, so I want to purify, I want to make my needle pure so I can touch it and use it while I'm in a pure state, not become impure from handling it. Okay, fine. So what do I got to do? I got to put it in the mikveh. One little problem. You ever heard the expression like a needle in a haystack? So this is like a needle in a mikveh. You would not appreciate somebody putting a needle in the mikveh. What are you doing, putting a needle in the mikveh? You're not going to find it. You're going to leave somebody else is going to find it probably. That's the issue, right? Don't put a needle in the mikveh. That's what I'm saying. Okay, fine. But the guy has to purify this needle. So what does he do? He knows about a mikveh that's in a cave. It's like an underground spring, like an underground river in a cave. Now, there are steps leading down to that spring. So what do you do? You put the needle on the step. And then the step is dry. Step is dry. What you do is you what's the technical term? Splish splash? Swish? That probably is the real word. You swish around the water, and so you get a wave action going, and then the water washes up onto the dry step, and now it's as if it were in the mikveh, and then the water level goes back, and that needle is sitting there safely on the dry step, and it's now purified. Okay, that's the technical, practical teaching of the Mishnah. Okay. Let's teach it now according to Kabbalah in a way that a child can understand and apply. What is a needle? Or better yet, what's the function of a needle? Because a needle's value is defined by its function. It's not a piece of metal. You know how many needles you would need to have scrap metal that's worth anything? Its value isn't what it is. Its value is the function that it performs, how it's used. So a needle is a special tool. What does the tool called a needle accomplish? It binds things together. It sewing. Now, a Jew comes into this world, and we are faced with a misrepresentation of reality. I know I'm in LA. I hear the helicopters. So, you guys don't hear it, do you? You do? What? That's right. Yep, that's right. You see it positively. So a Jew comes to the world, and there's this delusion of separation, whereby it appears that creator and creation are two separate things. I told you this is Kabbalistic, okay? I'm going to get deep for a second. There's a delusion whereby it appears that creator and creation are two separate things. The mission, the purpose of a Jew is to bring together creator and creation and to show that they're really one. So the Rebbe gives an example. Again, teaching this to children, and says, for instance, you drink a cup of water. He says a child drinks a cup of water. Now you could think of that cup of water as just another object in the world, just another created entity. Or you could look at it as a manifestation of the Creator himself, an extension of the Creator's existence. How do you look at it that way? The child takes the cup of water, this is how the Rebbe describes it, and he makes a bracha shahakol niya b'dvarei, Blessed is God by whose word everything comes into being, that this cup of water isn't a cup of water, it's godly speech. And you unite creator and creation. You create oneness where there had been seeming fragmentation or separation. In fact, the Rebbe goes even farther than that, and he says, sometimes you don't even drink the water. And the Rebbe paints a picture. The Rebbe speaking to children. He says, sometimes a child walks by a body of water, and he looks at the water. This is very quantum, by the way. This is quantum physics, the conscious observer. The Rebbe says, and the Rebbe is talking to children, when the child even looks at the water and perceives that this belongs to God, that itself is an act of unification, of showing that creator and creation are really one. And the Rebbe says, and even if the child knows that all the people around him don't see it that way, it doesn't matter, because if one Jewish child has that conscious awareness, it creates a change in reality. However, in order to effect this unification, to sew together, so to speak, creator and creation, you have to have a needle. Or perhaps more accurately stated, not to have a needle, you have to be a needle. Be the needle. What does it mean to be the needle? Be the instrument which sews together, which binds creator and creation and makes one entity. Now, if you're a needle, and that is the true identity of every Jew, because that is our job, is to unify creator and creation, to bring oneness where there had seemed to be plurality. If you're a needle, and you are, each one of us is a needle, there are two things that you've got to have, and they're absolute opposites. First thing you got to have if you're a needle, you got to have a pointy side. And the pointy side is sharp, the Rebbe says in Yiddish, scharf und hart. Sharp and hard. And that means that when you go out into the world, you have a certain chutzpah, in a holy way. You're not going to be influenced by the world, you're going to influence the world. So if they tell you to sit down while you're in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei, no offense, but I'll sit down when I finish davening. Because I'm not here to be shaped by the world. My soul didn't come down to a body. My eternal soul, which existed before the world was created, didn't come down here to be influenced. I came down here to influence. So you have to be sharp and hard. You have to be tough. That's one aspect. But then there's the back end of the needle. The back end of the needle is not sharp, and it's not hard. It doesn't pierce anything. In fact, it gets not pierced, but it's receptive. The back end of the needle is the eye of the needle. So that's where it's a recipient, where things go into it. The exact opposite of the front of the needle, which is putting holes in other things, the back of the needle is a hole that allows it to receive. I want to tell you, the last Fabrengen I sat at with Rabbi, and I'm like cringing to say this, but I think it's worth saying. Nachman brought me to Oli Torah, and he sat me with the Bachram, and your father sat next to me. I was so ashamed to speak. Opinion sitting next to me. Nachman, I mean, the real professors, they told me to speak. Your father sat there next to me like a teenager, like he was one of the Bachram, till 3 a.m, didn't say a word, didn't put his head down, didn't go to sleep. He sat there and listened. It's embarrassing. Who am I? I mean, forget about the fact that Pinchas' beard was a lot whiter than mine. I mean, Who the heck am I? Some American kid, some Zugakum, they're coming in with his beichsvaras, making stuff up. Rabbi, who lived through, who saw and experienced the real formative experiences of a real chassid whose every fiber of his being was chassidus and Rebbe. He just sat there, just let me talk. Not he let me talk, he listened. It's bullshit embarrassing. I'm saying for me, I'm cringing for me, that he sat there and at 3 in the morning when we got up, he came over and he thanked me. I promise you I didn't say anything he never heard before. I promise you I don't know a story and I don't know a Hasidic teaching that he didn't know literally 1,000 times better than I know. So it's like this paradox. You have this tough guy, fearless, courageous, will not be moved, will not be intimidated on one hand. And on the other hand, he's apologizing to little kids for letting his bag knock their feet. And he's sitting next to people half his age, listening. You don't find this in the world. You could find one extreme or the other extreme in some people, but to find both extremes in one person is very unusual. But that's the needle. That's the needle. Sharp on one end and receptive on the other. Tough on one end and humble on the other. Now, I'm going to continue the teaching because the Rebbe says like this. That receptive end, the eye of the needle, what goes into it? A string. Now, what's a string? You look at a string, you see a string. But from the eyes of the Rebbe's father, Kabbalistically, what's a string? A string is, what's Jewish? What's a string in Judaism? Tzitzis. And what's tzitzis? What are the fringes? The mitzvah of the fringes are you're supposed to see them, and it will remind you of all of the mitzvahs, all of Hashem's mitzvahs. Therefore, the tzitzis represent all of Hashem's mitzvahs. So therefore, the eye of the needle, which takes the string, is really taking the mitzvahs. So what does it do? What does the needle do? When it breaks through the world with its toughness and its tenacity and its fearlessness, it doesn't just break the world in a haphazard way, God forbid. After it shows up with strength and fearlessness, then it pulls through a string of mitzvahs so that the world becomes a recipient now of God's will. And then the string is not just that it is the way that you connect the Creator and the creation, but also now the mitzvah, each mitzvah is a connection. A mitzvah means a connection, means commandment. It also means connection. It's connecting you. So you're the connector and the connected, all with this string. But, says the Rebbe, in order for that to happen, you have to pick up on one of the details of the Mishnah, a detail that you might overlook. And that is, if you remember the Mishnah, the case in the Mishnah, where was the needle placed? Remember? On the steps. On the steps. The cave, the Rebbe says, the cave represents going down into the world, being involved in the physical world. So a Jew, a soul, comes down into a body and has to do mitzvahs with a body, with physical objects. You have to be in this world. But even when you have to go down into the cave, stand on the step. Don't get immersed in the physicality of it. Be present, be there, be involved, but be a little bit objectively removed. You think Pinchas Korf ever went to Manhattan? I have first-hand knowledge that he did, and I can tell you what he did in Manhattan. It wasn't a business deal. No, it wasn't. I remember when I was first married, and I drove a mitzvah tank for a bunch of kids. These little Crown Heights 13-year-olds, they collected enough money to rent what they call, what Lubavitcher kids call a mitzvah tank. It's an RV. Okay, they rent an RV, and then, you know, they put up like a sign on the side of the RV, and they call it a mitzvah tank. It's part of the Lubavitcher cultural experience. Anyway, so they're 13. They can't drive the tank. So they found me, and they got me to drive their tank. So I remember, this didn't happen on my tank, but I remember when we were parking the tanks on President Street, I'm not sure why, but that was like the place where to park the RVs overnight. So I'm parking the RV, and as I'm getting out of my RV, this other guy who's about my age, he says to me, wow, I had a really interesting night. It was Hanukkah Mivtzayim. What does that mean? It means you go out with these little tin menorahs, and you ask people, excuse me, are you Jewish? Do you have a menorah? Are you lighting Hanukkah menorah tonight? And you give them these little menorahs. So this guy is telling me, he says, I'm pulling down Kingston Avenue. I'm about to turn onto Eastern Parkway, and we're going to head into Manhattan. He says, someone's running after my tank, meaning my RV, like I have something of his. He's like running, jogging, and waving me down. And I look in the mirror. You know, they have big side mirrors. I look in the mirror. It's Pinchas Korf flagging me down. I'm thinking, what does Pinchas Korf want from me? So he says, he looks at me, and he's going, you're going on Mivtzayim? He's like, yeah. He said, can I come? Yeah, I guess. He looked at the kids. Yeah. I'm telling you, he didn't know the driver. He didn't know these kids. He got on this RV, and like he was one of these boys, like he was one of the 13-year-olds. And he went to Manhattan, and they handed out menorahs. I mean, it's unthinkable. You're talking about a scholar. You're talking about a sage. You're talking about someone who was, even at that point, advanced in years, and he's running after an RV on Kingston Avenue and jumping aboard and going out on Mivtzayim with a bunch of 13-year-olds. And he was probably the most energetic of the group. I wasn't there to see it, but I wouldn't be surprised. What does that mean? That means when you have someone who's like a needle, who's tough and unflappable, but he's not just tough to be tough. That's a gangster. If you're tough just to be tough, that's a gangster. But if you're tough in order to go into the world and bring the light of Torah and mitzvahs into the world, that's a Jew. That's a needle. Pointy on one end and receptive and bringing along a thread of mitzvahs on the other. So the Pinchas went to Manhattan, but he went there not because of anything he needed over there, but because he knew Jews needed him there. And he stood on a street corner in the cold, and he handed out menorahs to That's also called going into the cave but staying on the step. Going into Manhattan, but going there because you have a holy mission to fulfill. Not because you're going there for fun, or even with the excuse that supposedly you have a mission, but really you're stealing some vicarious thrill. The only thrill for that Pinchas going in the mitzvah tank was that he was going to help Jews do mitzvahs. And if it happened to be in Manhattan, so that's where he had to go. That's called standing in the cave, but not descending, standing on the step. So one thing I would say about V'hacha Yitin Eli, thing shall take to heart that we could learn a lesson, is that I think each one of us can think about ways in which we can try on our own level to embody this paradox. On one hand, to be a little bit tougher taking the mic away. Okay. Thank you. I think we can all think of ways of being a little bit tougher, a little bit less reactive. You know, they say there's two kinds of people, a thermometer and a thermostat. The thermometer tells you the temperature in the room. The thermostat tells the room the temperature. So in Chassidus, we call that a pnimi. A thermostat's called a pnimi. There's a chitzain, a reactive person. And he's like a thermometer. His mood is just a reflection of what's going on around him. But then there's the thermostat, the pnimi. He makes his environment match his inner world. So I think all of give them a lot of credence, we let them rule our lives, and each one of us knows what these things are. I think we could all just be a little bit more courageous and not to refresh the Uber app multiple times while you'll make the flight, you'll be okay. And at the same time, you know, it's not enough just to be fearless, but what are you going to do with your fearlessness? Is to be gentle and humble and teachable and receptive. To go out into the world and try to bring divine oneness to whomever you can reach. Because the fearlessness is not just a goal unto itself. It's what you do with the fearlessness. So I'll tell you one more thing. There was a letter that the Rebbe wrote to Reb Pinya when he was 16 years old. I think he was 16, yeah? It was before he turned, just before 17. And he wanted a tikkun. A tikkun means a rectification, a spiritual rectification. He felt he had done something wrong, and he wanted to fix it. So he wrote to the Rebbe asking for a way to fix it. Who knows what it was? One can imagine it. What did a 16-year-old feel guilty about? I don't know. Doesn't matter. So he wrote to the Rebbe and he asked for a spiritual rectification. So the Rebbe wrote back. The letter itself is rather short. But the Rebbe writes in the letter, I'm enclosing the Michtov Klali. Michtov Klali means a communal letter. The Rebbe wrote some letters that were meant for large groups of people. Some letters that Rebbe wrote to all Jews everywhere. This particular Michtav Klali was written to all of the yeshiva students. And actually it's dated Yud Aleph Nisan, which is the Rebbe's birthday. And so the Rebbe says, look in the Michtav Klali, look in the communal letter, and you'll find the answer to your personal problem. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what this Michtav Klali said. What this letter, this communal letter written to the yeshiva boys said. It says, we're coming up to Pesach, and everybody knows how rich the Haggadah is. That everything can be found in the Haggadah. One of the details of the Haggadah is the 4 sons. Keneged arba banim dibra Torah. That the Torah speaks about 4 sons. Echad Chochem, one is wise. Ve'echad Rasha, one is wicked. Ve'echad Tam, a simple one. Ve'echad She'enei, Yedei Elisha, one who doesn't even know how to ask a question. So there are a number of things that we can learn just from the positioning of these 4 sons, just from the order that they are placed in. More specifically, from the fact that the wise son and the wicked son are mentioned one after the other. The wise son and the wicked son are mentioned together. They're next to each other. Why is the wise son, metaphorically speaking, seated next to the wicked son at the Pesach Seder? So one reason is to teach us that the wicked son is not hopeless. We don't write him off. He's not hopeless because the wise son is there and he can have an effect on him. Another thing it teaches us is that it's the job of the wise son. The wise son shouldn't say, what's it my problem? I'm a good boy. I stayed out of trouble. No, he should deal with the son who is currently wicked and help him. And then another thing, third teaching, is that the wise son should know that there but for the grace of God go I. And it's not so hard to fall into one misstep, and then you could be, in another timeline, you could be the wicked son, and you could need his help. He's the wise son. Anyways, that's what the Michtav Klali, that's what the communal letter said. So the Pinchas read the letter, and he was convinced that the Rebbe was telling him, you're a bad boy, you're the wicked son, so you better find a wise son to help you. And who's the wise son? You're in yeshiva, so you're mashpia, your mentor, the teacher who's like the dean of students, who's responsible for mentoring the boys. In this particular case, in this yeshiva, was Reb Nissen Nemenov. So Reb Nissen should be your ben chacham, and he should help you because you're the ben rasha. He's the wise son, you're the wicked son. So Reb Pinchas was a teenager, he was a kid. He went to his mashpia, went to Reb Nissen, and he said, this is the letter I got from the Rebbe, and this is my understanding of it. Reb Nissen told him, I don't think that's what the Rebbe is saying. I think the Rebbe is saying that if you want to fix whatever it is that you feel needs fixing, then be a mashpia, be an influencer, be a teacher. Like, look for kids who are weak and devote time to supporting them. That's your way. If you want to fix yourself, help others. So he couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. And that itself, because, I mean, this is just my own commentary, but the degree of bittul, the degree of absolute abnegation of self that the yeshiva boys of that era, especially a bacher like Pinchas Korf, had to his mashpia was intense. So the fact that he rejected his teacher's interpretation means that it was pretty deep, that idea to him that there's no way I'm the good boy in this scenario. Anyways, he ends up coming to New York, and he has yichidus with the Rebbe. He has one-on-one private audience with the Rebbe. And they spoke about it again. And the Rebbe told the Rebbe he understood that it means that he's a bad boy and he has to go find somebody who will take him under his wing. And the Rebbe said, that's not what I meant. I meant you need to take others under your wing. You're the Ben Chacham. Now go out and help others. Teach them. Strengthen them. You want to fix yourself. Your fixing will be in making yourself available to others. So I want you to understand that Pinchas had literally thousands of students. Literally thousands of students. But he did not view himself intrinsically as a teacher. The Rebbe had to put him, had to force him into that role. And once the Rebbe forced him into that role and he understood that that's what the Rebbe demanded from him, well then he spent the rest of his life teaching and mentoring. And I want to tell you something, I know more than, I'll tell you a little bit of the Crown Heights Lashon Hara, right? People, I mentioned to you before, people think of Pinchas unattainable, that was him, he was like a different breed. So when people would joke about, he can't be like him, he was so spiritual, he wasn't of this world, he didn't even know this world. I want to tell you something. I know guys who were, to state it mildly, not the best students in yeshiva. I'm stating it mildly. Guys who were into whatever you want to imagine is the worst stuff that a yeshiva boy could fall into. It's that and worse. And not only were they able to slowly come back because of Rapinya, but the manner in which it was done. He would sit and learn Chassidus, learn the deepest spiritual truths with guys who were struggling with really, really, really basic stuff. You might look at someone like that and say, this guy is too far gone. This guy, he's not religious anymore. He's a goner. If we could set any educational goals with him, maybe let's just go for the simplest, the most rudimentary goals. My opinion would learn the deepest chassidus with these guys. I know these. I'm not going to name them, but there are people who, when they were going through their journey, when they were struggling as adolescents and post-adolescents, in their teens and their 20s, and they were ready to leave. They had left. Inwardly, they left. Outwardly, they were still keeping up appearances. They were drawn back because Korf sat with them and learned chassidus. So you're going to say that he didn't know the world. He knew the world well enough to be able to go down into the cave, albeit standing on the step. You don't have to go lie down in the cave. But he went to the cave. He went to Manhattan. He went down into the world when he was needed there. And he brought light to those who needed a ben chochem in their life. So, if we can try to just be a little bit like this, here's what I want to suggest to you. We all have inferiority complex. That's just, lack of self-esteem is the bane of our age. We all underestimate ourselves. And I can say this with absolute confidence because I want to tell you something. If you had any estimation of what your neshama is, of what the chelik elikami mamish, the literal piece of God that's in you, you would know you have infinite power and you would live completely fearlessly. And you would go out and you would take on the most ambitious projects to heal the world. I'm speaking to myself. So we are definitely underestimating ourselves. Okay, so this 16-year-old kid also underestimated himself. He needed the Lubavitcher Rebbe to tell him, no, you're not the bad boy, you're the good boy. Now go out and teach. Everyone here, if you know Aleph, teach Aleph. If you know Aleph base, teach Aleph base. Whatever you know. If you don't know Aleph base, if you only know Aleph, then only teach Aleph. But whatever you have, teach it. If you don't keep Shabbos, but Friday night there's Kiddush in your home, and your neighbor doesn't even have that, so invite them over Friday night. If you don't completely keep kosher all the time, everywhere yet, but in your house you have 2 sets of dishes, and your neighbor doesn't even have that, okay, so influence them. Your child doesn't go to a Jewish school, but they go to Hebrew school, and your neighbor doesn't even have that. Whatever it is, whatever level it is, be a teacher, be an influencer. No matter how much you think you are the weak one, no matter how much Jewish guilt is making you think that you're the one who needs help, I promise you there's someone out there who needs your help. And by helping them, you will find that whatever it is you are trying to fix will be taken care of. I should just mention that this is also connected to Chaf Av, to the Rebbe's father's yortzeit. Because the Rebbe spoke about the fact that in the Haggadah, we only overtly see 4 sons, but really hidden in the metatext, in the Kabbalistic metatext, there are 5 sons. 4 sons are at the Seder, even the Ben Chochem. He may be there under protest, but he's there. He may be there causing trouble, but he's there. He's engaged. Then there's the 5th son. The Rebbe spoke about this. The Rebbe wrote about it. The 5th son who's not even at the Seder. He doesn't even know it's Pesach. He's completely lost You know where the Rebbe got this idea from? From his father, whose yahrzeit is today. In fact, the last birthday letter, the Rebbe's father used to write to him letters, especially on the Rebbe's birthday, would always be a special letter. The last birthday, Yud Aleph Nisan, which is also the date of the Rebbe's letter to your father. But the last birthday letter, Yud Aleph Nisan letter that the Rebbe Levi Yitzchok wrote to his son, to the Rebbe, before he was arrested and sent into exile. So he writes to his son and he says that be'emes, that in truth there are 5 sons, and you have to know how to Kabbalistically decode the Haggadah. Where are there 5 sons in the Haggadah? I see Echad Chacham ve'Echad Rasha ve'Echad Tam ve'Echad She'ena Yedei Elisha. So he says like this. You got to know a little Hebrew and you got to know a little numerology. Before each son, it says Echad, 1 wise, 1 wicked, 1 simple, 1 who doesn't know how to ask. So the word Echad, 1, Aleph, Ches, Daled. Aleph is 1, you know, numerology, gematria. Ches is 8. Daled is 4. 1, 8, 4 is 13. Now it says that 4 times because it says Echad before each one of the 4 sons. So 13 times 4 is 52. And 52 is the numerology of Ben, son. So hidden in the 4 sons, there's a 5th son, Kabbalistically encoded there. And who's that 5th son? It's the son who's not even at the Seder. So here's the bottom line. We all know a 5th son. It may be a neighbor, it may be a friend, it may be a coworker, it may be a relative. We have all of us. If you can't think of somebody in your family who's a 5th son, you're not thinking hard enough. Be like Reb Pinya. Go learn with people. If you don't know how to learn with them, take them to the Tanya class. Take them to Chabad. But you have to start seeing yourself as the teacher, as the giver. You have to get over this inferiority complex, like that 16-year-old was able to do. And from that point on, when he realized he's the teacher, he never looked back. He taught for the rest, literally for the rest of his life. And he has thousands of students to show for it. Even the student you didn't know about, the one I told you about tonight. And I'm sure many, many more students that we may never know about. But Hashem knows. So that's it. Let's be strong like the point of a needle. Let's be humble and teachable like the back of the needle. Let's bring the string, the thread of Judaism and mitzvahs into everywhere in the world. When you go into the world, don't go all the way into the cave. Stand on the top step. Have a little bit of self-respect. Don't throw yourself into the fleeting pleasures of this world. A little objectivity, a little dignity. And most of all, be a teacher. Be an influencer. Give to others. You are the wise child. You are the wise child. And whatever it is that you need to spiritually fix, it will be fixed by helping others. And if we'll all go out and we'll do our jobs, not only we'll fix ourselves, we'll fix the whole world. Mashiach will be here, and we'll see Reb Pinya, and we'll see everyone else that we're missing. Should be now.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Taub. Thank you all for coming here as an opportunity to give my father the ability at 30 days after his passing to continue to teach and to continue to imbue this great lesson of life to each and every one of us that are here now today. My father was very proud of our center. My father constantly told me how he loves coming here. He said, what I loved coming to label is to come to the place where I could teach people, I could learn with people, and I know that he would be very proud of me to know that anything that I could do that will add another mitzvah to any one of us that are here today. So I've committed for the month of Elul, which is the month of preparation for Rosh Hashanah, to do 2 classes in his memory. On Sunday, I'm going to go back and revisit a class that I gave called With All My Heart, How to Pray. I remember when I was very young and my little Mendel was here. The Chabadniks would appreciate this. So my little Mendel was 5 years old, and my father came here to a bris of one of the children, and he was just davening. And Mendel stood up on a chair in front of him and looked at him and looked at him, and came running to me in my office, and he says, Sadie davens. Well, this is after 5 years old, he finally saw someone that davens. So, yes, he definitely wanted us and wanted me to daven. And I want to teach about davening, which is an amazing expression of the heart, with all my heart. I will do it every Sunday, beginning a week from this Sunday, which is first Sunday in August. The second Sunday in August, sorry, a week from this Sunday. I think it's August 8th. I'll start with all my heart. And on August 10th, Tanya, which was his favorite topic, his favorite book. Every time he was able to come on Shabbos morning, grab a Tanya to anybody, to any group over here. I'm sure many of you are here that learned with him Tanya. He just loved the sefer that connects to the soul and helps us express ourselves. Every Tuesday, 6:30 to 7:30. Again, August 10th, and they're on consecutively for the 4 weeks. So I'm doing it in the month of Elul for the sake of my father. Help me out. Help me bring my father's teachings here as a great continuity. And he'll be proud of me, proud of his children, who will live on and continue to be that needle of toughness, tenacity. There's nothing in the world that ever deterred him. There's nothing that we used to go on the airplane. We used to look for him before the flight because he's busy putting on tefillin with someone. It's like, make sure he doesn't miss the flight, because every moment that he was, my brother-in-law told me when he came to Israel and he came for a simcha. He was a good father, he was a good grandfather, family person, but it was, okay, hi, how are you doing? Always had very serious conversation with everybody in the family to make sure everyone's okay. And then, okay, what do we do now? Let's help someone. And my brother-in-law told me, he said, okay, it's in Israel. He said, let's go put on tefillin with people. So he says, okay. So there's time for the wedding. It's in a few hours. We have time. So he sees him walking upstairs to the neighbor. He says, no, we're going downstairs to the car. He says, why, all these people put on tefillin already? He just saw every moment, every place that he was as an opportunity, as a mission. And his smile and his emes always captured the people that he connected with. So I want to thank you all again for coming, helping out, and doing a mitzvah for him. On your way out, we don't have a collection, which we want to thank those that dedicated this evening, first of all. There are a few of them here in memory of my dear friend Feivel. My father went to his house to put on tefillin with him and was very impressed with his, very committed person. I remember going to him 20 years ago with my father in his house. So it's a memory of Feivel, Ben, Mordechai. And thank you, all the other people that participated. Phyllis Solomon participated, and Yaakov Rosenblatt, other people that participated. Thank you very much for making this evening happen. On the way out, please write your name inside one of the classes you want to take, and let's make every day meaningful and purposeful, and may his memory be with us for many years to come. I'll say the Mishnayos after davening, as we said before. We'll say the Kaddish inside, and take some more food. We'll sit down more for a l'chaim. Whenever your flight comes, don't worry. The Uber will come or the ride will come at 11. Up until then, we're here. We'll fabring, we'll connect, we'll make a difference in the night. Thank you very much. Myra followed by a fabring. Thank you so much.